Okay, this morning I'm going to talk to you about Flexbox. And I've done several videos on just what is Flexbox and the terminology and how to integrate Flexbox into your projects. But we're actually going to create a very simple project this morning. This is going to be creating like a header menu bar up here across the top, something that you would see on any app or um, any generic website, anywhere that you look on the internet. So you can see here that we're just going to jump right into it, and we have our HTML markup here. So we have the branding to the left and the links to the right. That's what we're planning to do. This here is the branding. You can see the branding here, and it's called site name. And then we have our navigation menu here, is the nav. Now I'm writing in Pug, which is kind of it's kind of like Sass or HTML, so I'm not writing out the full compiled HTML, but you can see the HTML here. So we have a header, and inside that header we have a div with the class of branding, and then the site name. And then on the same level as the branding div, we have a nav with a UL and list items inside of it. And then we have a button as one of the list items as well. And then we close everything out. So all Pug does is take this and kind of strips away all of the it strips away all the other stuff so that you can just kind of see the nesting a little bit more easily, and it also allows you to do some different kind of cool things, just like you can do different cool things in Sass with CSS. So if you get a little bit confused, just know that everything is the same. So this is nav, this is an HTML5 tag, this is a UL tag, this is a list item tag, and inside that list item, so everything indented is inside of whatever it is. So you can see everything is nested inside, right? So the UL is inside the nav, the list item is inside the UL, and then the A is inside of the list item. So that's generally how Pug works, and this is our general markup. This is the same kind of markup that you would see basically anywhere. Our header's name is split, so I had to give it a header name. And basically branding left and links right, it's split, the two things. And then it's very important that branding and nav are on the same level. Okay, so we need two elements here, and we need our two elements to be on the same level. And then I've done just a couple of general body styles here. So the margin, there's no margin. I've taken that away. If I don't take it away, there's like a little 10 pixel margin or something like that. I don't want that because we're going to make a block of color here, and you'll see that it just kind of looks weird if you don't have that. And then I've just kind of gone with the generic font family of Roboto, just so it doesn't look like this and has a little bit of style to it. And as of right now, actually in this video, we're not going to have any JavaScript, so we're just going to be working with the HTML and the CSS. So let's get into the CSS really. So this is going to be our markup, and it's here, and there's nothing else really to do with that. So let's go in first and let's start working on the header. So I have a header element, but the header element's called split. So we're just going to work off of that. It's not bad, in a tutorial like this to just say, header. But if you have a very big site, you're probably using header over and over, so you're going to need to define each of those headers either with a class name or with an ID. So I'm just using an ID because this is a very specific header. This is for the site nav. Normally in a website, I might call it something like masthead. If I was doing that, the masthead is the part with all the branding, and on a newspaper, it's the top part, that has the name of the newspaper and the date and all that kind of stuff. So I would normally do that if I was using making a bigger website, but today we're just going to go with split. And then for that, I like to kind of define it first. So We'll just do a background color of some sort. So we have a background here now of our entire header section. We're getting some kind of funkiness right here, and that's coming from this H1. So naturally the header elements have some margin to them, and that's how they get separated out. You can see there's separation here. There's separation in the top and separation on the bottom, and that's causing this split right here. So if we just um, this is indicative of split H1, so the H1 under the split, that's all this means. So the split H1 is, we just need to do a margin 0, sorry, margin of 0. I'm using SAS, by the way, and so this is what, this is one version of SAS. You can always use SAS that looks like, it looks like this, but essentially, you know, you're writing it like this. You can write SAS like that, where it basically looks like CSS, but that's not really the way I'm writing it. That's kind of SCSS, which is a little bit different. So I'm using SAS with the indentations. And you can see when I show you the compiled CSS that it just looks like this. There's nothing strange about the CSS. You can see that I did split, and then when I did the under that, it turned out to be split H1. You can see that I've just indented, and when you indent in SAS, it adds it as a split, and then whatever this is like afterwards. So if you're a little bit confused, you can read up more about SAS. It actually saves me a lot of time, and it brings a lot of clarity. So when I'm looking at this, it's a lot easier for me to tell what's going on, especially when the CSS gets really long. It helps me kind of delineate what's going on where. So we have our H1, and we took away the margin. You can see there's no more margin at the top, and now there's no margin at the bottom either. All right, so let's go back to our header section, the whole section, and this is where we're going to start getting into some Flexbox. Now, if if we put display flex on this header, then all of the child elements will be, well, they'll line up next to each other in a row. So we have one child element of branding, and we have one child element of nav. This is why it was so important to keep these two on the same level, is because now it's going to make our branding stay over here, and it's going to take this nav section, it's going to pull it up all the way over here to the right. So when we do display flex, you'll see, okay, all right, so it pulled it up over to the right. So you can see that, right? So now these two things, where they just a moment ago were lined up vertically because they were all relatively positioned, and that's how the flow of the document is top to bottom. And the flow is to take up all the space to the right and the left. Now, display flex says bring it up, and then create all of these things kind of in columns across. So now we have two sides, two distinct sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to separate those sides out from one another. I don't like that they're close together like that. So in order to we can position these two things in several different ways, and we use the term justify dash content, and we are going to use space between. Now what that does is it creates space between the elements. Okay, you see how that happens? So one element is going to go way up against the left, and one's going to go way up against the right. And then if we add some elements in between, those things will be spaced out as well. But the first and the last one go all the way to the edges of the container. We could also do something called space around. Sorry. And space around gives space, equal space around each element. So if there were more elements, it would be a little bit more squished together. And then you could also do the default is flex start. It's a little bit of a verbose terminology, but Flex start puts everything squished all the way up to the left side. Flex end, sorry. Flex end squishes everything to the right side. So if you want everything right aligned, that's how you would do that. And then there's also a centering property. So justify content center puts everything in the center of the parent element. Okay. But for our purposes, we're going to say space between. And one of the cool things about this is that you can see that when I do responsive things, that this sticks to the left, this sticks to the right, and so it doesn't matter what size. So this is like here about 320 pixels is an iPhone 5 size, so you can see that we still have, we have the things separated out, and then you can pull it out, and this is, a little bit less than a monitor on most computers, and so everything is still stretched out. We're not having to do any kind of crazy positioning or absolute positioning or anything like that, but this is essentially what you would get if you had some sort of fixed or absolute positioning. You'd have to stick it over to the left like that. So it's and we've only done it with 2 lines of CSS. So this is, you can see where Flexbox can give you a lot of power to align things and to do that very easily and very quickly. Now, one thing I don't like is that everything is stuck to the top here, and what I want is for everything to be on the same level. So I'm going to do something the other way that we can align items is through align dash items. And again, we have the same exact types of properties. The default is flex start, and so that's all of the items being aligned vertically up on the top. We could also do flex end, and then everything is aligned to the baseline. This one's hard to tell because it's taking up all the space. We can do, if you had several different items and there were some other items down here for some reason, you could do space between. I don't think that's going to do very much for us because we only have one single item. If there were other items down here, it would align them one to the top, one to the bottom, just like the justify content space between does one to the left and one to the right. And then you could also do space around. But for our purposes, we're going to use the centering. And so easily, you've got everything vertically centered. And then if we wanted to do everything horizontally centered, we could actually have it perfectly centered in the middle, both horizontally and vertically. But this will suit our purposes for now. I would like to put a little bit of padding on there just because it'll look better. Now let's just do no padding on the top and then 1 rem of padding on each side. One of the quickest ways to make your designs look more professional is to put some padding to give some white space to your designs. So just a little trick, try a little bit more padding. This here looks pretty amateur with everything up against the sides, and all it takes is just a little declaration to put some padding on there. Okay, so that looks really good, and now we're going to move on to our navigation element. Now, I'm just gonna, so this is, sorry, this is what we're styling here. And I'm just gonna get in here, and I'm not gonna give the navigation a name since it's such a small project. So I'm just gonna call it nav, and we're just gonna style this over here. Actually, let's move on to the UL first. So let's go nav UL. And then what I don't like is the bullets. So the list style is none. And then you can't really see it right now, but there's some padding. And we're going to make that 0. You can watch them move. Okay, so we get rid of padding on here. And then now we need to display this as flex as well because I don't want a vertical navigation over here. Maybe that's something you want. I don't. I want the links all across like this. So again, we call it display flex. And when we call display flex on the UL element, then all of the children line up. So the LIs are the children of this unordered list. So it lines up all of these elements, these LIs, all together, and now we have a nice little list. I'm going to go ahead and say justify content, so we're going to space these out a little bit, and we're going to say space around, and I don't think that's going to give us very much until we do some other Flexbox properties. And then those are already aligned to the center, but it's going to be important to do that later. So align items to the center because we're going to give this one some padding and stuff. And when this gets tall, it's going to want to push these up. So we need that to be aligned to the center as well. Okay, so right now, if we look at if we give this a background of red, and we give this a background of blue, you're going to see a couple of different things here. Well, I thought you were going to see a couple things. Okay, there we go. So you can see here that we don't have necessarily we're not controlling the space that these two things are flexed at. And because we're not controlling the space, we're not giving these any widths, then we're getting all squished up here and we're getting a lot of space out here. And once we get here, then they start to meet each other. And so that's not exactly what we're looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this all another Flexbox property. And this one is a little bit more difficult to understand because it's just kind of a hard concept to understand. And what it's called flex grow or flex shrink. And then the shorthand property for it is just flex. And so what I'm going to show you is how to control the space of your flexed items. So let's do the generic is flex 1, 0, 100%, or for a lot of things is 0%. But we're going to go with, I'm picking these numbers because I already know, but I'm going to show you what they look like. So we're going to say 60%. Let's put this down here because I'm going to have to make some media query adjustments pretty soon. So we're going to make that one flex 10 60%. We're going to make this nav element, and you put these on the direct children of the nav element. So branding and nav can have these flex shorthand properties, and the LIs can also have these flex shorthand properties because they're the direct descendants or children of these flexed elements. And so we're going to go down to the nav. We're going to say flex 1, 0, and 40%. Let's see if that's going to work. That's not going to work. Let's do 0. Okay. All right. So that's better. So you can see now that what's happening here is this is called the flex grow, flex shrink, and then this is the percentage, kind of the width. This could also be defined in pixels. So you could define how much that grows in pixels, how wide it is in pixels. So maybe if you do 20 pixels, you could see a little bit more. Okay. So now we have a defined width over here. You can see that that is no longer a percentage, so it's not moving. It's just a defined 100 pixel width. And as we change that, that will grow. See that? And so that just means that it's going to take up more space. And when this title element gets up against it, then it's going to make some kind of changes. Okay. So it's like putting a wall right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep it real flexible. So we're just going to say 40%, and we're going to call this one 60%. So essentially it's a 2/3, 1/3 type of layout. So there's, this is taking up 2/3 of the space always, and this is always taking up 1/3 of the space. And even as we flex in, you can see that it's changing a little bit, right? So that is flex grow and flex shrink. I didn't explain it very well, but I do have a video kind of going through some different scenarios of flex grow and flex shrink. Essentially, it determines whether a box is flexible, so that when you're shrinking it like this, does the box stay a certain size, or does it shrink down and then the content reflows inside of that? So that's kind of what you're determining, so that you can control the spacing of your elements a little bit better. All right, see what we have when we take away these colors. That's not what we're going for. Okay, so right now we have a really nice basic setup. So you can see this is like a iPad size about here. And we have our site name over here, our branding, and then we have our links here, and then we have a little button. Let's get in and just do the styles for the button and see if there's anything that we need to change. So a button is an HTML element, you can see. If you don't use buttons very much, buttons are good for whenever a person clicks an action and it does something like a pop-up or a modal, or it does something on the page. There's no page refresh, or it doesn't send you out to another link. That's when you would use an A tag when you're going to another page. A button is something that typically you use as a UI element that does something on the same page. So maybe this button would click and open a pop-up or something like that, or a drop-down menu right here where you could sign up. So I'm semantically choosing the word button because it's the better fit for whatever I'm planning to do. But in essence, it works and acts a lot like an anchor tag, an A tag. So what we can do with the CSS is make it a little nicely styled transparent background with a little border around it and some padding. So I'm just going to go with background transparent. If you didn't know, you can just take away, excuse me, you can take away the background, and we're going to change the border to 1 pixel and solid, and just kind of a light gray. Actually, let's do white. And then we're going to give it some padding, just a little bit of padding, maybe 5 pixels. And then on the sides, maybe 10 pixels. Let's do more than that. And you see how when I make that bigger, it's going to make this whole header bar taller. But our link stays centered with it because we did this centering property here. If we take that away, then you can see that it's going to line up to the top. Okay. If you wanted if you wanted your items to align to the bottom, you would say something like flex end, and then it'll put those all lined up to the baseline. Okay, so you can see how that align items property is how it affects the vertical alignment and the vertical rhythm. We're just going to use center, and let's go ahead and make the color of this white as well, just to distinguish it. Let's go ahead and do our navigation anchor elements. We're going to color them white as well. And then take away the text decoration. Um, sorry, text decoration none. And so now our links, and then we'll do a little bit of a hover. So this is all SAS. If you don't understand what's going on, this is essentially adding the A and, so it's A colon hover. So when you do the and, it essentially adds this to right here. So that's all we're doing is we're doing an A tag colon hover like you would normally do in CSS. And what we want to do is we want to color it. I like to use an RGBA value, which is red, green, blue, so RGB. And then this stands for the alpha channel. And alpha deals with transparency. So if you know anything about Photoshop or some sort of graphic design, the alpha channel is the one that deals with transparency. So what a cool little trick, you can do our white, whatever color is up here, and then you do a comma. And then this next one is the alpha channel. You could also do the RGB colors, which for white are going to be 255, 255, 255. So you can do a specific color, and then you can do the alpha channel, which is 0. We'll say 7, and that'll be 70% transparency. So you can see how it changes. So when I roll over, it makes it 70% transparency. So we're kind of getting the gray come through into the link, which creates the illusion of a color change, even though we're still using the same white right here. We're just using it with a little bit of a color transparency. Okay. And then for the button, we can go down and we can say, when you hover over the button, the background, maybe we get a white background and we get the color of, I don't know, like a dark gray. You see that? And maybe that's a little bit too stark. Maybe that's a little better. Okay. And then we'll do a cursor as a pointer. And this is kind of a, excuse me, not a very well-known CSS property, but when you can see when we don't have it and we hover over, sorry, come on. Not changing. Okay. There we go. Nope. Well, it shouldn't be doing it. But what happens is essentially you get this pointer, like you get the little hand that is on there and pointing whenever there's a hover. So we have our link set up. We have this. We have our site name. You could very easily make this into a link, so that when you click on this, you go back to the home page. And let's work on our styles though. So I'm pretty happy with the way that that looks right now. We could do some things to kind of shrink this up a little bit. I don't have a super large monitor, so I know from working on one and working on this on a larger monitor that this is going to get a little strange. So these things are going to continue to stretch out as the monitor size gets bigger and bigger. And what I want to do is I want to add a media query that just kind of shrinks all this up whenever we get out to a larger monitor size. So the way that we do that is we go into our UL here, and then we say and app media. So this is a media query. So whenever the minimum width gets to, I'm doing this kind of blindly because I don't have a monitor that's that big. The minimum width gets to, let's say, 1300 pixels. And then we're going to, actually I'm putting this media query on the wrong one. Let's put it on the nav element. And we're going to take this flex, and then we're going to move it down here, and this has to be the nav element. Let's get all of our stuff straightened out here. Okay. I didn't just break that, but see. Did maybe I need to move it down. Let's move it down. Let's do that. Because all these elements are kind of attached to this up here, I think it's having a hard time with it. So let's move it. So at media, and the minimum width is 1300 pixels. Then the nav element here is going to it's going to flex at whatever percentage we want, and I'm actually going to bump this down to 25%. And so because we're changing this element, we could also change the header element up here if we wanted to, this flex here with the split, but not necessary per se to do that. I think what I've done here is I really goofed this up here, so this should be the branding. I should have separated that out here. So now whenever we show that red section, it should just show the branding. Yeah. So the inside is the branding, and that'll make everything work. It looks the same, but I assure you that it's not the same. So what we're doing is we're putting the flex on these two items because they're the children of this larger display flex item, the Flexbox. Okay, so now our branding, excuse me, and the nav element, they both have the flex to them. This is no different because inside of branding is our H1, so that's why that doesn't change. And now we have it'll be nicely styled once you get to 1300 pixels. This will not change, but this will kind of shrink up a little bit. But we can actually go through and we can write the same media query. We just copy that and we go to branding and we write the same media query at 1300 pixels, and then we just do, since the other one is a flex of 25%, we can just make this one 75%. So for branding, make this 75%. And if you have a larger screen, you'll be able to tell the difference when it gets to that breakpoint. We won't be able to see it here. But let's go ahead and work on the baseline styles. You may not be quite accustomed to working like this. Sometimes I'm very strict about starting out at 320 pixels and then I just design everything from there. With Flexbox, sometimes it throws everything out of whack a little bit because you're trying to get it to look good at certain breakpoints, and you'll see now that I have to do some kind of backward engineering to, can you see how it squishes up? That's not exactly what a professional design would look like, so we have to go through and we have to change that a little bit. So let's go in, let's go into this section here with the branding, and what we're going to do is we're going to add another breakpoint. Actually, we can copy the whole thing. And then we'll set it here. And this breakpoint is going to be this one. It's going to be the 60%. And that's going to happen at, what's a good space for that to happen? Let's say 550. We'll try that. So at 550 pixels, we're gonna start getting into this, okay? And then before that, we're gonna say 100%. So when I go up under 550, now instead of only taking up 60% of the space in the header, this is going to take up 100% of the space, which is going to have the same sort of effect as a display block, where it takes up the full and it pushes everything down. So you'll see whenever I change this one that it's also going to do the same thing. You can't see it now, but let's go down to this copy here. And we'll go down to our nav element. So we're going to need to add a different media query for our nav element too. And then this is what's going to happen at 550. So we're going to have our 60%, 40%. That's going to happen at 550 pixels. But before that, everything's going to be at 100%. Oh, not 1000. So before that, everything's going to be at 100%. And the reason that we're not seeing anything, we're still seeing it squish up, is that I have forgotten to add a particular element. And that is going to be a very important one. And it's called flex-wrap. And the default is no wrap. That's the default style, and that means that whenever our flex items come up against each other, they start squishing. They don't wrap around to the next line. But that's what we want. We want the things to wrap around to the next line. So when we write wrap, all of a sudden you can see. So right here, the 60 and 40 begin to bump up against each other. And when they do, you can see that now they're taking on that 100%. Right? So at 550, which is about right there, then they each take on 100% of the space out to the right where they are. So that's exactly what we want. So at 320 pixels, we have a nice little link line up here, and then we have our header name, and then when we come out, then now we have a nice little transition there at 550 pixels. And then if our screen were wide enough, we would be able to see at 1300 pixels that this part here shrinks down even more, so that so that these links kind of stop spreading out a little bit. And so that is your basic header, and with the branding to the left and the links to the right, and we are using Flexbox in order to create all of the situations here. Now you can do some things here with the UL element. So instead of the space around, we can take the space around and copy it, and then here at 550 pixels we could say the UL is a space around, but before that is space between. So when the page first loads and we're looking on a small screen, did you see how that changed? So you can see now there's a little bit of space here. These are not lining up to the padding of the internal section. But whenever we make the change to space between, then it spreads out the first element and the last element to the edges where our padding is for the header section. Okay, you see how that works? We can give a little bit more padding if we come down to here and we do another media query. That media minimum width is 550 pixels, and then we say split padding 0 and 1 rem, just like here. But at this one, maybe we just want to do 1 rem. That's going to give us some space on the top and the bottom, theoretically. Or we could do 1, 0, 1, 1, 0. Okay, and then that'll shore up the bottom links here there. So that gives us kind of some equal space here. And then when we get out, we lose some of that padding, and we go no padding on the top, and just one rim of padding on the edges. So we have our padding here and here, but we've lost some of the padding on the top. So it keeps our, if we didn't have that, then you can see it keeps that padding that's on the top that we added for the small screens, right? So we just are essentially taking that padding away to kind of pull this up and create some symmetry with the spacing. But we kind of need that space when we're on a small screen to be able to separate out the site name and the links very clearly. So this would be on a phone. You know, a typical phone would be looking something like this. And then as you get larger, you know, this is like an iPad. And then this will be an iPad on its side. And then you're working your way up. So this is a basic responsive menu using Flexbox. And you can see, just with these few lines of code, we're not having to do anything fancy with absolute positioning. This is all relatively positioned. There's nothing out of the ordinary going on here. But these sorts of elements here, like the flex element, are really key to being able to understand. So are the alignment properties for Flexbox. If you have any questions, I appreciate you leaving them down in the comments below. If you want to see another particular instance of maybe a different type of header, I've thought about centered headers or just some different types of headers, maybe a responsive header with a drop-down menu. You can also do those things using Flexbox. Flexbox is fully supported in almost every single browser that you're going to use. And so there's no reason for you not to use it. It's not a spec that's waiting to be approved or waiting to be rolled out. It's something that you can use right now, even in Internet Explorer. And I use it on production projects that are live right now and have not had any issues in any of the major browsers or on mobile. So it'll make your life easier. Check out the other Flexbox tutorials in this playlist. They'll show you how to do things like centering or making things different alignments based on flex start and flex end and things like that, aligning to the top or to the baseline. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below. I'll try to put out a few more just real world scenario type tutorials to help you see kind of the common areas where you can use Flexbox in your everyday development. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you sharing this with anybody that you think it would help, and giving me a thumbs up or leaving a little bit of a comment. If you want to subscribe, I have lots of different tutorials and different things on my own channel here. All right, thanks, and have a good day.